I want to start with what I like to talk about most, and it's our vision. And for anyone who has joined our ZertoCon annual event, which actually happened a month ago, we talked about our vision, and we talked about how we envision Zerto over well, actually what we're supporting and what we're doing over the next, let's say, 5 years or so. And for those who actually watched the 2011 video, it hasn't changed much. We just started to deliver on it more and more and more with each version that we released. And our main goal is to help customers and help actually the world deliver uninterrupted technology for businesses and people. And of course, businesses run an application. So to us, the business application is in the center of what's important to an organization. And this is where we want to follow that application. And Zerto protects and mobilizes applications. And we started with the private cloud. Back in 2011, we started with the private cloud. And in 2015, or actually 2013, we moved into MSPs. And in 2015, we added public cloud to it. And of course, as new public clouds came out, as new public clouds arised, we started supporting those as well. But we don't stop there. We don't want to stop there because we want to make sure that we protect those applications no matter where they're going within an IT landscape. So, and this is actually the exciting part where Deepak is going to talk about. We're going that next level as well, that next generation as well. And this is where Deepak will have all the interesting demos and all the interesting slides about how Zerto brings its DNA of how you would protect and mobilize applications into that next gen application world. Of course, a vision needs to have more on there as well. And of course, we don't stop at next gen. We want to take every piece of that business application landscape and want to protect, mobilize, and make sure that you can deliver that uninterrupted world to your end users, to your customers, but with Zerto at its core. Zerto protecting and mobilizing your application no matter where they go. And we're delivering that through the use, or actually through our IT resilience platform. And we started out very early on delivering VMware to VMware replication and automation and orchestration for DR purposes. Back in, I believe, 2018, we actually announced our IT resilience platform because we evolved from way beyond just supporting VMware to VMware workloads and way more than just DR. So that's when we released our IT resilience platform. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, of course, with a specific focus on cloud. So what does that platform look like? What does it look like from a capability perspective? Now, Zerto delivers an IT resilience platform with, at its core, continuous data protection. And continuous data protection allows us to move data really efficiently from A to B. And with things like journal-based recovery, we can do really granular recovery as well. And on top of that, we deliver all kinds of capabilities. Most people know us from disaster recovery. That's what we've started with back in 2011, but we've added more and more capabilities to the product, to the platform as it evolved. One of them is operational recovery. And when I talk about operational recovery, I really mean those day-to-day recovery needs, those day-to-day restores that one might do. I need to recover a file. I need to recover one VM. I need to recover a disk, things like that. So you won't declare a disaster for something like that, but you still need a solution in place to deliver the right SLAs and to deliver the right efficiency in recovery to be able to do that. Now, of course, there's compliance, there's tax laws, there's regulation we need to take into account, and we might want to store data for a longer amount of time. So that's why we've added, and this is actually a big thing that we've released in Zerto 7 last year, long-term retention. We added long-term retention to it as well. Now, we want to make sure that you're protected anywhere. So that's why we really support and adopt the hybrid multi-cloud strategies as well. So everything we do is with hybrid multi-cloud in the back of our minds. Now, once I have a copy of my data somewhere and it's recent, I might want to use that data for other things as well. I might want to use it to perform patch management, test patches before they go live on a copy environment. So actually customers started using our platform more and more than just disaster recovery and operational recovery. They started adding things like, okay, I can do offsite vulnerability scans right now because I have a copy of the data somewhere else and I have the workflows in there to quickly bring it up and quickly bring it down again as well, as I don't need it anymore. So really that on-demand type of operation. Now, all these capabilities are using automation and orchestration. So we're making them efficient, we're making them fast and quick by using automation and orchestration. So it's basically wrapped around every capability that we have built in to make sure that we can visualize how you are protected, to give you insights to what is happening in your environment across all those different sites that you might have, whether it's on premises, whether it's in the cloud, whether it's on a VMware-as-a-Service component somewhere else. But we want to give you insights to how it's protected, how it's performing, what kind of resources am I using right now? And that's where analytics comes into play as well. So I'll talk a little bit about a lot of these components, and I'll talk a little bit about Zerto Analytics in some of the next slides. Now, we talked about capabilities. Let's quickly go and look at what are the components of the platform. Like I said, the core of what we do is continuous data protection, and continuous data protection to us is a combination of always-on replication, journal-based recovery, application consistency grouping, and long-term retention. Because everything what we do, all the technology we use to move data from A to B is based on continuous data protection. And journal-based recovery allows us to do really granular recovery. And I'll go into that journaling a little bit later. Application consistency grouping. It's great that I can have one VM consistently across to a different location. I can recover it consistently, but applications don't consist of a single VM anymore. They consist of multiple VMs. They might have multiple database vendors within that application stack, and using application consistency grouping, we can actually bring back an entire copy of that application back to how it was consistently. So consistency is kept across all the VMs, not just within a single VM. Like I said,
I have a question about the application consistency.
Yes.
I know that works really well when you know your application really well. So you already know what all the components are that compose it. But not every organization, in my experience, actually knows what their app is composed of. Is there anything that you're doing to help discover the components that actually make up an application?
That's not something we're delivering in the product.
Okay.
So we do allow you to group them. We do it really efficiently, and they could be really large groups, but we don't have anything built in that does like the discovery or the assessment.
Okay.
But great question. So wrapped around all that is automation and orchestration. And automation and orchestration really delivers our organizations and end users the workflows to basically utilize all those capabilities. Perform a failover test, move your application to a different platform, restore a VM, restore a file. And we want to add the most amount of automation and orchestration in there that, of course, makes sense, but to make it as efficiently as possible as well. Because we all know if I want to get my data back, it needs to be fast, it needs to be quick, it needs to be efficient. Things like a failover test, for example, is also completely non-disruptive. That means that both protection and production systems are not impacted when I do a failover test. Again, wrapped around that, analytics and control, giving you insight into what is actually happening in my environment and how can I control that and how can I plan for it as well, because something that's built into Zerto Analytics is resource planning that allows you to plan for expansion of VMs you need to protect, or I want to start to use the public cloud instead of my own data center to protect my workloads. That's all built into Zerto Analytics. And altogether, this is our single platform. Everything will look the same no matter where it's deployed. Everything's part of that platform. And I think that makes it a really strong strong platform to, especially with all the capabilities in there, to change the way you protect your environment right now. So let's look a little bit at that journal-based recovery, because that's really important. And I'm going to link that into how we do it in the cloud, because to be able to protect your on-premises workloads into the cloud, you need to use different technology. But our replication engine is universal. So that's why I want to start with, what is our journal? And our journal is actually nothing else than a list of points in time, a list of checkpoints where you can recover to. But how does the data actually get into that list? Now, we do that by using always-on replication. So what happens is a VM actually starts writing its changes. It starts writing IO blocks. And while those blocks are written, we copy those blocks, we compress them, send them over to a virtual replication appliance, which is our way of, that's our appliance, it's our scale-out architecture that protects and replicates all those changes. And we store those changes into a journal. It's first in, first out queue. So basically it's just a list of blocks, and between all those different blocks, we place what we call checkpoints. And those checkpoints are generated in flight every 5 seconds. So that means that if I look at that list, I have a list of a lot of points in time that I can all use to recover to. So for example, if ransomware hits me at 1 minute past 5 p.m. and 56 seconds, I can actually rewind to the previous checkpoint before it actually started and go back 5 seconds in time, with increments of seconds as well. And I can do that for an entire site. I can do that for a single application. I can do it for a single VM, or even for files. Because the journal is continuous, because it's continuous replication, we can recover files that were actually created 3 minutes ago and deleted 5 seconds ago, because it's always on. Now, as soon as that journal hits its, let's say, SLA, because a journal, you can compare a journal with what I'd like to call a retention, because a journal can be anywhere up to 1 hour history to 30 days history. As soon as the block is older than its set SLA, it gets pushed off to the replica disk, and we'll start to continue adding those changes into the journal. I'll pause here for 1 second. Any questions here?
Yeah, is it this journal configurable? I mean, if I have a big latency between the two sites and I need a bigger journal because, you know, to flush all the blocks out, it takes some time. So do we have some tunables to make it sure that I have enough space to recover from all the writes?
So every journal, so each VM gets its own journal, and every journal is completely configurable. So I can add a time-bound history to it. So it needs to contain the last 1 hour up to 30 days of changes. I can add limits based on size. So needs to be a maximum of 150 gigabytes, and try to fit that SLA in there. So there's multiple ways you can configure a journal. The technology by itself, so the replication by itself, is completely asynchronous. So that means if something happens, I have a very high latency connection, because it's asynchronous, we can cope with that. We can even offer like RPOs of 14 seconds going from Stockholm into Singapore, or going East Coast to West Coast, or cross continents, because of the asynchronous way we're doing things. So whether it needs to flush, yes or no, doesn't really matter to us. So we have technology built in, which we call bit mapping, to be able to cope with higher latency at certain times. I hope that answers your question, Enrico.
Yes, okay.
Okay, cool.
I got a question on your previous slide.
Yes.
Okay, so you were mentioning about files, apps, VMs on sites. I didn't see containers in there. So You don't cater to the cloud native crowd yet?
So we absolutely do. But unfortunately, my colleague Deepak can talk about the cool stuff today.
Okay.
So he'll talk about how we are working on something for containers and Kubernetes as well. So, but I won't steal his thunder.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
But great question and great segue into Deepak later on. So, like I said, we really want this to be one platform for multi-cloud and hybrid cloud as well, really delivering on the capabilities that we just talked about in the IT resilience platform. So delivering continuous availability, data protection, and workload mobility across all those different clouds that we support. So really giving you the flexibility to choose where you want your workloads, at what time, based on requirements, cost, latency, availability, you name it. And if we look at which clouds we support, and I'll quickly go to this slide, is as I told you, we started supporting on-premises environments. VMware we started with, we added Hyper-V later on, but as IT evolved, as new targets came there, we started to support first AWS, then started to add Azure to it. So really giving you mobility and DR using public clouds. But before that, we already started to support managed service providers and their cloud offerings. So we have a network of over 450 managed service providers offering cloud services, DR as a service or migration using Zerto as a platform. So it's not just that public cloud, the hyperscalers, but it's also the larger MSPs. I just put through on.
Do you also support VMware on AWS in case I wanted same exact environment but in the cloud?
That's actually a great segue into my next session, or not next session, but next part of this slide, and that's the VMware-as-a-Service. So we support, and I'm not sure why it switched slides. We support VMware-as-a-Service, and specifically the ones delivered by IBM Cloud, Azure, and Google Cloud. So Azure has what they call Azure VMware Solution, and we support that completely as well. We support Google Cloud VMware Engine, something that they actually, I think they released this or talked about this on a previous Tech Field Day. And IBM Clouds, I think they call it IBM Cloud for VMware Solutions out of the top of my head. Now, the specific cloud you're talking about, VMC on AWS or VMware Cloud on AWS, is something we don't support right now. And that has to do with the way it's being deployed right now. It's really locked down, and we need a little bit more access and a little bit more integration into both the hypervisors and vCenter. Now, that's something that Google with VMware Engine can do, and it's something that Azure VMware Solution does as well. It's just right now not something we can offer with VMware, but VMware is a great partner, so we are working together with VMware to see how we can be part of that ecosystem as well. Hope that answers your question, Enrico. Okay, wonderful. Now, I need to speed things a little bit up because I know Deepak has a lot of demos and a lot of stuff he wants to talk about. So let's talk a little bit about how we operate in Azure. When things in the on-premises environments, things are great because I can manage VMware hosts, I can manage my vCenter, I have a lot of access. But in the cloud, everything's abstracted. Is there a host? I don't know. I can't see it. So we can't integrate deeply into those components. So we had to work with the cloud, and we had to work it the cloud way. So in Microsoft Azure, we don't integrate into hosts, but we use all the native offerings they have available, their services they have available, we integrate with those. So basically, this allows me to replicate workloads into Microsoft Azure. And for those who are familiar with our architecture, we basically have two components, which is the management component, a ZVM, and a VRA, virtual replication appliance, which is our scale-out replication component. And that's how we scale, that's how we replicate. Of course, in Microsoft Azure, you can't do it that way. So what we've done is we built what we call a Zerto Cloud Appliance, which has some parts of the ZVM, some parts of the VRA built into that, but really storing everything in where it needs to be stored in Azure. For example, we store our replica disks into page blobs. So we're using blob stores because that's more cost efficient. And we're storing our journal data into block blobs because they're smaller, they're more efficient for us to use with journal data because that's small block size data. And as soon as we need to recover, that's when we start creating those instances on Azure, and that's when we start moving that data from the page blobs into managed disks. The nice thing about that is that the way Microsoft has architected Azure, the copy of, or actually maybe you can call it a clone of the page blob data into the managed disk is almost instant. So the only thing we need to do is call an API, make sure the data is moved into the managed disk, and we can start the VM. Well, actually, there's another thing we need to do first. We need to write all the journal data in that disk as well. Now, because we integrate deeply into all those APIs using, and Microsoft is a great partner of us, we can support replication between different Azure regions as well. We can also replicate back again. And because of the tight integration and because of the automation orchestration, we deliver an RPO RTO that's similar to what you can actually achieve from a VMware to VMware, an on-prem to on-prem environment as well, because continuous data protection gives you those RPOs of seconds, and all the automation and orchestration gives you those RTOs of minutes. And that's but with cloud savings there, because I don't need to compute unless I actually perform that failover. Now, something we released over the past couple of versions is a new way of scaling in Azure. And that's something I want to talk about right now. And that's the use of Azure VM skill sets. Because as you've seen in an on-prem environment, I can scale using our VRAs, our virtual replication appliances. They're installed on every hypervisor host, and that's how we scale. With Azure, you can't, because we don't have control over the hosts. We don't have VRA installed on every host. So what we had to do is we had to scale the cloud way. So what we've done is we integrated with two native services of Azure, Azure Queues and Azure VM skill sets. And VM skill sets actually allow you to scale based on a certain threshold of work in a queue. So what happens is, as soon as a failover is initiated, Zerto will place all its IO, all the work that needs to be done, all the data from the journal into an Azure queue. The Azure VM skill sets will monitor that queue and will start deploying workers that actually write that data into the replica disk as it needs to. So that could be, we start with 10 workers, and as soon as more work hits that queue, we can scale up and down using those Azure VM skill sets. So that allows us to scale really using the way that Azure has intended the VM skill sets and the way cloud wants you to scale by using their native services. So that's how we scale in Azure. Now, we talked about Azure, we talked about AWS as well, and I'm going to quickly skip this one. Now let's talk about AWS. Because in AWS, there's different services, there's a different model, there's different APIs, but we still want to support that platform as well. Well, we can still have replication going on from VMware, from an on-premise environment going into AWS. But instead of storing it in blobs or in disks, we store it on S3 objects or in S3 containers. And as soon as you initiate a failover, we'll start importing that data from those containers into EBS volumes and making sure the instances are created in the right order with everything you need from a DR perspective or even from a migration perspective. Now, like I previously mentioned in Azure, we don't know hosts, so we had to scale there a different way as well. So the way we decided to do that with AWS is using what we call a Z importer. And what we've basically done is we've built our own scale-out system because at first we started using the AWS APIs to import the data from S3, but it turned out that it didn't scale well enough and it wasn't fast enough. So we had to build something our own, but we actually did it together with AWS, and a lot of the improvements that we built into our import is actually used right now by AWS to develop new APIs, and actually some of those APIs have been released already. So what we do is based on the data, the amount of volumes that you have in your S3 bucket, we just start Z importer instances, all orchestrated, all automatically, that will do the import for you. And as soon as the imports are done, we'll simply destroy those instances, crash and burn, and your data is available in AWS S3. And this gives us a really scalable and faster recovery than we used to have by using the APIs. Again, everything we do is really built with scale in mind, but all using the native capabilities of those clouds to ensure the most effective way of doing it as well. We don't want our customers to deploy additional instances to manually scale. We want to do that for them. It needs to happen in the background, not visible to the end users.
I have a question.
Yes.
It's Kyle. As part of that failover, is there a way to set out the infrastructure in AWS, or the VPC layout, load balancers, security groups, the stuff that you needed to make that stuff work, right? Is there a way to do that as part of the automation and part of the failover?
So the infrastructure, like the VPCs, the security groups, everything like that needs to be there. That needs to be predefined in order for us to configure it and make it part of our orchestration.
And that includes things like what security groups would you set them up beforehand? If you're using managed services, for instance, you would have that all set up with security groups in mind, set up beforehand, or? Correct.
Yes, they need to be available there once we start the replication.
Okay, and this is purely at the minute. Is that just EC2? Do you have a way of talking to snapshots for other services?
Right now, it's only limited to EC2.
Right.
Yeah. So really focused on the infrastructure as a service.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
I have a question as well. So. Do you also support, a similar architecture? If I have a big object store, but I don't want to invest money in a secondary infrastructure at the moment, okay? So just replicate data remotely and maybe one day access, I don't know, resources that are on the cloud to run my VMs or whatever. So can I replicate directly to the object store like you do in the cloud use case?
So actually, when you are replicating your workloads using Zerto into AWS, we're actually replicating into S3 directly.
Can you do with a private S3, private object store?
Okay. So you're basically saying S3, use the S3 API to write to compliant storage.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we can't do that from a replication perspective. Mm-hmm. Something that we're working on is to support it from a long-term retention perspective, and that's when you can do it. So you can take one of those journals or take, you replicate data first, and then you can take a copy from the journals and a replica disk and store that into S3 compliant storage and just keep it there for whenever you need it, and then use Zerto to restore basically those VMs from that S3 compliant object store. That's the way we're looking at it right now.
Okay, very good.
So we talked about AWS, we talked about Azure. Let's briefly talk about VMware-as-a-Service as well, which is, it sounds a little bit weird, but it's a little bit boring because it's VMware. And we've been doing VMware since 2011. So we know it, we love it, and we have deep integration there. And once those VMware-as-a-Service offerings on top of public clouds came up, they were really happy because this really allows us to support them basically right out of the gates. It uses our same software components. It uses the same software that we've been using on-prem VMware environments as well, but we just allow you to install it into those VMware-as-a-Service offerings and start replication. So whether you want to use that VMware-as-a-Service offering for DR, or you are already running in VMware-as-a-Service and you want to replicate it to a different region, or maybe even, God forbid, another vendor that's also offering VMware-as-a-Service, then that's possible. And right now, we support IBM Cloud with IBM Cloud for VMware Solutions. We support Microsoft Azure with Azure VMware Solution, and we support Google Cloud with Google Cloud VMware Engine. And of course, when keeping an eye out on the future, if any others will arrive, there's a few that are lining up there, a few larger ones that are lining up their services and their deployments as well. We'll start supporting those as well, but you will probably have a press release about that as well. Now, one of the other use cases that people use cloud for is storing long-term retention data, storing backups. Now, with Zerto 7, we started to support long-term retention, and in those first releases, we actually supported only NFS and SMB. That did allow us to use things like the AWS Storage Gateway to support AWS as well, but through a gateway using NFS and SMB. But what we have lined up for our next releases is support for those native cloud storage offerings. We'll start with Microsoft Azure as in storage blobs, add AWS S3 support, and Google Cloud support as well through the S3 API. That's what I just talked about, Enrico. That's how we're going to support the S3 compliant storage solutions. It's by offering the support to add those as a long-term storage repository. Basically, we protect all the workloads locally using our CDP engine, and we'll use our long-term retention technology to offload it to the cloud for efficient long-term storage.
So I have a couple of questions on that, because usually long-term storage is more understood as something like Glacier or something like that. So you're saying that you're going to use S3 as the long-term storage tier on that side?
Maybe if I rephrase it to longer term storage, it makes a little bit more sense. So in our journal, we can store anywhere from up to 1 hour to 30 days. Long-term retention can take it beyond those 30 days, but because we're so flexible, because we're software only architecture, we can even say, okay, I'm using my journal on-prem for the first 7 days. Then I'm storing it onto longer term retention storage in the cloud for the next 30 days. And then, and this is something that we have on our roadmap, then we'll offload it into Glacier for the longer term retention. Because our journal is really short term, is really about that granular recovery, is really about that operational recovery. That's not to store it for many, many years. But as you say, the long-term retention is typically Glacier. Yes, we completely agree. That's a next step for us. The first thing we need to do is we need to support S3, and then specifically S3 and S3 in frequent access, the same with hot and cold or hot and cool in Azure. And then the next step is tiering it off to even more cost-efficient storage. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Now, the final piece of what I want to talk about is Zerto Analytics. Zerto Analytics really gives you that insight. Zerto Analytics is delivered as a cloud service, so you don't have to host anything. You don't need to run your own database. It's hosted by Zerto. It's delivered as like basically software as a service component, but it's part of each and every license that our customers get. And Zerto Analytics gives you insight into how are things protected. It will give you real-time dashboards, like what is my RPO right now, but it'll also give you historical reporting to report on, let's say, what was my SLA on average the last 90 days. And I can consume that using my Android phone, iOS phone, or even HTML5 interface. But it's all multi-site, so no matter where my data resides, no matter where my VMs reside, it will be visible in Zerto Analytics. Like I said, it has a resource planner in there as well, giving you the ability to plan for the future. So we've covered real time, the now, we've covered historical, the past, and we've now covered the future as well with the resource planner. And all that while giving you insights into your resource consumption as well. We have really detailed storage usage reports, which show you exactly what is it that Zerto uses, where is my data resided, where is it located, how much do I have free, how much am I using for protection, and also using that data to plan for what if I want to have more retention in my journal, what's the impact on my storage there. Now, to finalize, I'm sorry for running a little bit over, Deepak. I know you wanted me to cut it off at 30 minutes. I speed it up a little bit. Zerto's vision is to basically cover you wherever you go and support all the clouds out there, all the major clouds out there, and deliver that mobility, that protection, no matter where you're going, where you want to protect to, where you want to move to. So this picture basically displays it, whether you're going from on-prem to Azure, from Azure to AWS, from AWS to Google Cloud, from Google Cloud to one of our MSPs and back to on-prem again. We want to help you. We want to either mobilize it, protect the data there, or use those services to make sure you are efficiently protected. And that's really our vision. We have great partnerships with AWS, with Google Cloud, with Microsoft Azure, and really they're helping us, we're helping them. An example is the CBT API that we use in Microsoft Azure to actually protect Azure-born VMs. It's actually co-developed with us. So we delivered the spec and they've used that to deliver it so that we can use it. So we can actually achieve RPOs of seconds, even going between different Azure regions or going from Azure into an on-prem environment. So having those partnerships really help us deliver on this and help deliver on that future vision that we have to protect any application, no matter where it goes.